Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History as we take a look in this episode at the Magna Carta. How excited are you to learn about the Magna Carta? I don't care if you're a kid in school, a lifelong learner, or if you're just cray-cray on the internet. We're going to go do the giddy up for the learning and go get her done right now. All right, guys, why don't we start with the big idea first, and that is the Magna Carta is muy importante. Very important in terms of the development of individual rights and this concept that I have liberty and that the king, the government, can't take away that liberty without reason. And really, the Magna Carta is going to be very significant in the development not only of kind of English law and the English Constitution, the development of Parliament, but right here in the good old USA. Parts of the Constitution are really directly lifted from the Magna Carta. When you look at the suspension clause, which is in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2, and it says that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless rebellion or invasion, public safety may require it. This idea that habeas corpus, you can't arrest me, you can't put me in the hole, Jack, unless there's some process, some reason, some idea. In fact, the origins of habeas corpus can be traced back to the original Magna Carta from 1215, the 39th clause, which said, "No man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." Right? You have to actually violate a law to get arrested, and then you get to be judged by your peers. How great is the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? That's where it came from. So the big idea is the Magna Carta, which is going to be not that significant in the very beginning. It's going to be very significant. It was to look at the development of the Republic and Western civilization. How about that? All right, let's take a look at a little bit of the history of the Magna Carta and get a little bit more specific. My French is terrible, but we have to start with talking about the Angevin kings. And we're not going to do a million years of English history right here. We should know that in the very early 13th century, the early 1200s, we have the Angevin line of kings. And this is kind of a king line that has roots, a dynasty that has roots in France that's ruling the Kingdom of England. Henry II was the first of those kings. You might have heard of a guy by the name of Richard the Lionhearted. And Richard the Lionhearted especially, and for him, Henry II, really had kind of abandoned this concept that there was a real relationships between the barons and the king. That probably wasn't true, but there was definitely less conflict between the kings and the barons before this line. The king was operating in the sense for the best interest of what they saw as the kingdom. And this new line is a little bit more interested in armies and crusades and killing Muslims. So that might be part of the reason why, by the time we get to the death of Richard the Lionhearted, where his brother takes over, his brother is going to be King John. King John's nickname was Soft Sword. So you can see that he's not going to be that successful in terms of military conquests. And early on, he starts losing battles with France. He starts losing land. And as a result of that, he started looking for some extra change. He starts raising taxes. And of course, the barons in this feudalism system, you have the king, you have the barons, you have feudal lords, all the way down to the bottom, you have the serfs. Everybody answers to somebody. But right now, the king isn't answering to anybody. And they're being reminded in their history that way before this, in the year 1100, Henry I had actually signed something called the Charter of Liberties. And that really wasn't in effect for very long, but this was a very basic listing of rights. And I'm not talking about rights for everybody. I'm talking about rights for the people way up here, right? For the barons, for the feudal lords, for the people that are right underneath the king. They're looking for relief in terms of taxation. They're looking for a lessening of the king's power. I mean, the king at that point could deny a marriage if he wanted to. He'd be like, no, you two aren't getting married. You couldn't get married. So basic things like that, property rights, inheritance rights, very basic ideas that there were certain freedoms the king couldn't take away. That was lined out in the Charter of Liberties, and that's like 1,000 years before this. That's 1100. So now fast forward to 1215, and these barons are looking at this line of kings who are operating under this banner of force and will, of divine right, and they're not liking it at all. So in 1214, we kind of have the final straw for the barons when John I loses the Battle of Bouvines. And now they're going to start to organize themselves, and they're going to start to really represent a rebel group. They even elect a leader. Robert Fitzwalter becomes the leader. There's a conspiratorial theory that he believed that the king had violated his daughter, and this was a personal vengeance kind of thing. But he's going to be the organizer of the rebels. Now, John I wasn't the dumbest of the kings. He certainly could smell this rebel group that was forming. And previous to 1215 and 1213, he made a series of moves to lock himself in with the Catholic Church. He made an oath to be a crusader. He said he was a vessel of the Pope. He said that we're on the side of the Church. And he sends communications to the Pope at that time, who was Innocent II, of this conflict between the barons and the king, and he's looking for support. Now, eventually, the Pope's going to respond on the side of John I, but they don't have the internets back then, so the letter took a very, very long time. And by May, the rebels who had organized themselves, this rebel baron group, attack London. And at that point, now the king realizes he's locked out of London. He's going to have to start to negotiate with these guys. So they agree, the rebels and King John, that they're going to get the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, to be the arbitrator between the two sides. So in June 1215, based in part on that previous 1,000-year before document, the Charter of Liberties, the barons put together what's called the Articles of the Baron, kind of their wish list in this new relationship that they're going to have with the king. And that's going to be modified. It goes through a whole bunch of different edits in the negotiation process. But basically, at the end of the day, we get the Magna Carta. That's right, the Magna Carta is called the Great Charter. The Great Charter is the Magna Carta. And in this new relationship, the king's going to give up some stuff, and the rebels are going to put down their weapons, and they're going to renew the oath to the king. At least that's what they all say they're going to do. And that the basic root of the Magna Carta isn't so much all of this talk about liberty. And there's certainly a few passages in there that are going to evolve into this concept of due process, that when I get arrested, there needs to be due process, kind of procedures that you go through, of habeas corpus, that you can't arrest me without reason, and certain other rights that are going to evolve. But really, the document is addressing what these barons' concerns are: inheritance, tax, land, real estate, kind of the nitty-gritty of common law, let's put it that way. And certainly, there's only 3 of the 63 articles that even mention serfs. The rest of the documents, like I said before, deal with the barons' concerns. And even some of them are a little bit fishy when you look at it through the lens of today, like Article 54. No man is to be arrested or imprisoned on account of a woman's appeal for the death of anyone other than her own husband. So sorry for the ladies there, unless someone killed your husband, you can't be a witness to a crime. And certainly there's other stuff in there like protection of church rights in terms of taxation, in terms of inheritance. But at the end of the day, the most important clause is going to be 61. It's called the Security Clause. And what it said was that there was going to be a council of 25 barons. And if the king didn't listen to the Magna Carta, wasn't following the rules after 40 days of an edict from this council of 25 barons, then the barons had the right, the lawful right, to take over the castle, to take power away from the king until he resolved the matter. That's huge. That means that there's going to be accountability between the king and the barons. But unfortunately, the Magna Carta is not going to work out for those guys way back in the day. They're both going to violate what they were supposed to do. The rebels are supposed to get out of London. They're not going to get out of London. King John isn't supposed to appeal to anybody. He goes running to Pope Innocent II, and that's going to fall apart, and we're going to get what's called the First Baron War. And if there's a First Baron War, it's going to go on for a very long time, and we're going to avoid all that. So let's wrap it up. Why is the Magna Carta important now that you know what it is? Now, the Magna Carta is going to go through a whole bunch of different revisions. Most of the ugly language is going to be taken out of it. But the important clauses, the ones that are going to evolve into this habeas corpus concept, the idea that you get a trial by jury of your peers, those big ideas of liberty, that we have this liberty, are going to roll themselves into the Enlightenment. We see them with John Locke. We're going to see it in the English Bill of Rights and the idea of Parliament and the spreading of that to the idea of the Republic in the United States. We've already talked about that, but the limitation clause in Article 1, the Fifth Amendment's due process clause, and the Ninth Amendment can be all traced to that Magna Carta. So hip hip hooray for the Magna Carta. And remember, the Magna Carta is not a constitution. It's just something in English history that evolved into common law and was adopted into later legal matters. So now at least you know something about the Magna Carta. Thank goodness for that. So you're going to be ahead at the next party you go to or the next test you take, you're going to pass. All right, guys, I say it because I say it at the end of every lecture because I mean it with all my heart. Where attention goes, energy flows, and we'll see you guys next time you press my buttons.